Gary.
Let me punch that little button. Howdy, folks. It's good to be with you. Thank you, David. Let's see. I am an alcoholic. My name is Gary Kincaid. And I am really, really, really grateful for a sobriety date and for a new life. Mine started July 25th of 1994. Started out in a place that Chris knows well, Odessa, Texas, way out in West Texas. And today I live in a little town about 90 miles due east of Dallas, Sulphur Springs, Texas. I could make a 3-hour talk on that. All I'll say is I live in Sulphur Springs due to the grace of God through the 12-step program of Alcoholics Anonymous. The two children that I abandoned in my alcoholism live here. And long ago, because of the grace and the actions of this program, they insisted that I live here. So I get to be with the children and the granddaughter and have a life that I never dreamed that I could have. Now, I don't know how many new folks we have here. If you are new, there's a couple of things I want to try to get clear early. Number one, if you get a chance to tell your story, tell your story. I love to tell my story, not because I like to hear myself talk, which I probably do, but because I love to hear again and again and again and again what's happened to me and to my life. And I am more amazed by it today than I've ever been. And I've been amazed for a long, long time. The other thing that I want to share with new people, I hope you were just like I when you got here. I was so goofy I could have got hired by the circus. My life had been totally burned down. I tell new people today, I sure hope that line and there is a solution that you've come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of your life as you've been living it. And I had gotten to that point and thought it was the worst time in my life, turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me. But I say that, I want to share some things about those early months, and I'm not sure if I remember them correct or not. There were days I'm not sure, I could start reading the big book and I could start a paragraph, and time I got to the last sentence, I couldn't tell you what was in the first sentence. But I've had help of still being in contact and doing this walk with some people that were there when I got there. I had some great help having a sponsor after 1 year that I had for almost 29 years. And he did not mind reminding me of things. So I want to share some things with you, and there are things that happened to me, but I don't want it to come across like I got it immediately. Something was said and I got it and it was cleared up then and forever. They had a statement they used to use a lot out in West Texas: repetition confirms and strengthens habit until faith becomes natural. And there's a lot of repetition in this, and thank God there is. Sometimes on a Zoom talk, I like to read something out of the big book, and this has been a favorite of mine for years and years and years, and it tells a lot of my story, and it's in the foreword to the second edition. The physician had repeatedly tried spiritual means to resolve his alcoholic dilemma, but had failed. But when the broker gave him Dr. Silkworth's description of alcoholism and its hopelessness, the physician began to pursue the spiritual remedy for his malady with a willingness he had never been able to muster. He sobered, never to drink again up to the moment of his death in 1950. And here it is. This seemed to prove that one alcoholic could affect another as no non-alcoholic could. It also indicated that strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. And I love reading back over that. And, I read this book with my sponsor, but I didn't get any of that when I read it. What I got out of that is I had a sponsor who was not interested in me learning recovery. He was interested in me doing recovery. But I can look back at this time and see I'm going to talk about four men today. And one of them is a guy that lived in Odessa, that if you were around that man for 30 minutes, you knew he was in Alcoholics Anonymous. He did not maintain personal anonymity at his workspace and with his friends. And, he wasn't punching you in the chest and talking AA, but he lived a life that people like me who knew the hopelessness and the futility of life just dreamed and wished that we could live. And he let people like me know where that came from. And I'll forever be grateful that when my moment of grace, my moment of clarity arrived in July of 1994, I knew a man. And I never want to forget that, that I'll forever be grateful that Joe didn't hide uh, and didn't keep himself so anonymous that people outside the rooms couldn't find someone when their time came. I can't tell that whole story. I can tell you that I went to his office that morning. I don't really remember what we talked about. I was still pretty drunk. What I do remember is around noontime, he said, "Get in the truck." And he took me to my first meeting. He didn't give me a schedule of meetings. He didn't give me a bunch of phone numbers. He didn't say, "If you really want it, you'll go get it." He had me in his office. He put me in his truck and he took me to that meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm not even sure I wanted to go, but that didn't make much difference to Joe. I can remember going in, looking at my shoes, being embarrassed. I'm starting to shake just a little bit with the withdrawals. I didn't have the DTs my first 10 or 12 years of drinking, but I had them those last 12 to 15 years. And I don't remember much about that meeting. I don't remember if I got a chip. I don't know who was chairing. I don't know what the topic was. All I know is that after that meeting, the guy who's going to become my sponsor assigned some of his pigeons to me. And though I wasn't really aware of it for the next 3 days, I never was alone. One or more of those guys was with me while I was detoxing. And they were taking me to meetings. And again, I don't remember anything that was said. I was crazy as hell, and I found out you guys like us better that way. What I do remember is I believe it was on my fourth day when I walked into the suburban group of Alcoholics Anonymous in Odessa, Texas, and two of you, separate from each other, not these guys that have been watching me, two of you walked up to me and called me by my name and welcomed me into that meeting. The first word I really remember hearing in one of your meetings was Gary. And I remember being amazed by that. And these guys that had been working with me or helping me detox told me I needed a sponsor. They pointed out the guy that I should ask. walked me over to him, and on that 4th or 5th day, I forget which one it was, I walked out of the room and I had a sponsor. And I feel very fortunate. Joe and Charlie had been in Odessa in 1989, and they had done one of their big book workshops there at the Suburban Group. And my sponsor was a man that had about 16 or 18 years when I got him. He had about 10 or 11 years when Joe and Charlie came, and that weekend changed his life. He had really never been introduced to the big book. He had a Meeting Makers Make It recovery. Uh, but he took the big book seriously. He took Joe and Charlie seriously, and he took his job with me very seriously. I know that looking back. If you're new here, a couple of things that happened in the first two meetings with him. And I remember it was a Saturday or Sunday. I didn't have a vehicle that ran. He had to come pick me up. I like to tell people both of those days, I think he bought me a hamburger. And we talked for about 2 hours solid both those days. And that guy listened to me intently. And I don't believe he ever listened to me again after that. He remembered everything I said and he used it against me after that. And I'm really thankful that that happened because in that second meeting, and I'm starting to clear up just a little bit, and I'm telling this man about another divorce I'm going through. I'm telling him about the IRS just put me on their amends list I hadn't filed in 8 years. I'm telling him about these two children that I'm so ashamed of the father I've become. I'm telling him about this liver I bump into when I turn around. I'm giving him all of the legal problems I've got. And thank God, I remember him saying something to me like, Gary, those are not problems. Those are consequences. And we're not here to fix your consequences. What we have here is a way of living that if you'll do what we did, it's going to be like a rock thrown in the pond and the ripples are going to go out and they're going to touch every one of those consequences. And the day will come, and it won't be by next Thursday, but the day will come when you will be able to look back and not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. And I didn't have a clue about anything of the promises at that time, but I can tell new people that time has come in my life a long time ago. But what he told me is, you need to find out what's wrong with you. And what he introduced me to was exactly what Bill did with Bob in that reading there. Bill sat down with Bob and told Bob about the description of alcoholism as Bill had lived it. And that's what Jerry did with me. And I found it later there on, we know is page 44 of our book. If when you honestly want to, you find you can't quit drinking entirely. And that point of honestly wanting to had not occurred in my life until I was about 44 years old. And I'd spent about 3 years of not wanting to drink and drinking anyway. I'd spent about 3 years where the promises were no longer to children or to family or to an employer. The promises were to me. I'm not going to do it anymore. And I did it. And what I found out that day is what I've got to experience hundreds of times since then. If I sit down with another person and I tell them about my life and tell them about the times that I honestly wanted to stop drinking and found I couldn't stay stopped, if they're an alcoholic, they get it that quick, just like I got it that quick. And then he took me to that second part of the description. If when drinking you have little control over the amount you drink. And he didn't talk to me about the allergy of the body or the craving or any of that. He's just asking that question. And he's getting me to look at my own experience with drinking and to look at those two questions. And in that moment, I knew for myself what Bill writes in the big book following that. If this be the case, you're probably an alcoholic. And I'll forever be grateful that Jerry started me there and he didn't want to talk about the divorce and he didn't want to talk about the IRS and he didn't want to talk about the kids. He didn't want to talk about any of the consequences because he knew what I was to find out later. My whole life, I've been having consequences and I've been always fixing the consequence and never knowing the problem that was spewing them out. And Jerry went on to explain to me out of both his and my own life experience that this is not the illness of alcohol, it's the illness of alcoholism. And one thing he said to me very early, he said, Gary, we're going to surround you. You're going to need rides. You're going to have people picking you up and taking you home. And we're going to take you to the cafe and we're going to put you in the car and we're going to be around you. And if you try real hard, you might make it 45 or 50 days being able to just not drink. But if you're an alcoholic of the big book variety, if you're an alcoholic like I am, after that 45 or 50 days, you won't be able to stand yourself sober and you'll have to drink again. So we're going to get busy on the solution to your problem. And that's the 12-step program out of this book. And we got started on it quickly. You know, a lot of you folks have been around for a long time. The world has changed a lot from the time this book was written. Heck, the world's changed a lot since the day I got sober. But I've been noticing ever since I've been here that two things have not changed and will not change. The illness of alcoholism is exactly the same today as it was the day that Bill had that visit with Bob. The alcoholic is both bodily and mentally different from his fellows. I don't know if this comes across as an editorial. I don't know if I can. I guess I can give an opinion or two. And if y'all knew me, it wouldn't be an opinion. If it's mine, it's a fact. But I've gone to so many meetings over the years where the new person never gets to find out what's wrong with them. You know, the group will be about some kind of topic that day, or people will start telling a drunk log about DWIs and going to prison and all of this stuff. And none of that makes me or you an alcoholic. And it just gives new people an avenue to say, well, that never happened to me. I must not be one of them. And I hope to God that every person that walks into one of our rooms walks into the rooms like I did in Odessa at that time, because we heard about the illness of alcoholism. And we heard about, but even greater than that, I got to see the solution to that illness in the lives of these people. You know, that reading that I did, and, you know, we don't have a lot of time here, but all of us, all of us have, I believe, a tremendous responsibility to make certain that when that new person or any person comes in, I happen to believe that everybody that walks into AA for the first time needs a 12-step call. They need someone willing to take a couple hours and go to the parking lot with them or go to the cafe with them. I I was at a meeting last night. I'm doing the traditions in a town about 90 miles from here. And they started the meeting, and before I got up, they said, "Now, everybody here that's willing to be a sponsor, raise your hand." And then they made the statement, "Now, new people, if you need a sponsor, go to those folks." Well, of course, the first thing I had to share with them, I said, "Let's try something different. How many of you in this room do not have a sponsor? Raise your hand. Keep them up for a minute. And all of you people that raised your hands to be a sponsor, you ought to be going to them. We don't wait for them to come to us." And I say that out of my experience of going to Joe's office that morning. I mean, I don't know if I've ever been more broke than I was that day, both spiritually and physically. But I do remember stopping at a convenience store on the way to his office, getting a cup of coffee and a $1 scratch off ticket. And I'll believe to my dying day, as hopeless, as afraid as I felt that morning, if I'd have got a 10 or $20 winner on that scratch off ticket, I never would have made it to Joe's office. And for me, that's an illustration of how really fragile this slender reed that we hang by when we walk into these rooms is. And it doesn't matter if it's down and out or if it's up and out. It doesn't matter if they're walking in, riding a bicycle, or driving a Mercedes. The reed is very slender. And how they're greeted, how they're touched, and what they hear may be the difference between life and death for a suffering alcoholic. And things like remembering names and greeting people. I tell my folks, you don't have to sponsor everybody that walks in the room, but by golly, you need to meet them. You need to meet them and you need to get their phone numbers and you need to call them regularly. Just, how are you doing? Do you need a ride to the meeting? It was good to meet you. Just to give a little bit of encouragement, let that little thread that they're hanging by not be so fragile, and do the best you can to remember a few names because that's important. Well, my case is Jerry had me doing an inventory on, I believe, my third Saturday there. I didn't know what I was doing, but he did. And I couldn't even finish it. But when he came in, he sat down at the table with me and he helped me finish that fourth step. And I didn't realize I've already told him 90% of it in those first two meetings we were together in. And then he did that magic thing of asking me about the two or three things that I was never going to tell anybody. He told me one of his, and I came out with both of mine. He sent me home to do 6 and 7 out of the book. I didn't know what I was doing, but I did it. We met the next Tuesday, and he told me to bring my 8 step list, and he had one more complete than I bought. New people, if you got a good sponsor, they're listening when you do that inventory because he had me an 8 step list. And I'm not here to tell people how to do it, but I'm going to tell you that I'm glad how he did it with me. He gave me my first three amends, wrote them down on 3 by 5 cards. We rehearsed them a little bit. And he said, "You do these three this week." He didn't ask me who I wanted to go to or who I never wanted to talk to. He gave me my first three. The next week, we did three more. I found out later on he was giving me the ones that I could do face to face. I didn't have enough money to go out of town to do them, but he didn't want me doing them by phone or by letter. He wanted me to sit down in front of people face to face and to make those amends. And long story short on that, I owed $142,000. It took me nearly 16 years to get that paid off. I wanted to wait till I had the money to pay it. Jerry had me doing 5, 10, and $15 money orders. And the good thing about doing it that way, it may have taken me 16 years, but I was free from those after about 6 months. But about my 5th or 6th week, I met the second guy I'm gonna tell you about. The second guy that's one alcoholic can affect another alcoholic like no non-alcoholic can. This is not a guy that's a sponsor. This is not a guy that's probably ever told his story anywhere. This is a guy that claimed his 2 square feet on 3 meeting nights a week, and he suited up and he showed up and he was in the middle of this thing and he was joyful about it. And every time he spoke, and I can close my eyes and I can see him today. Now, folks, when I got here, I had a wall full of college degrees, many of them advanced degrees. And I'm out in Odessa, Texas, with a bunch of oil field workers that couldn't spell cat if you spotted them 2 letters. And I've got this thing in me that I guess my sponsor knew about. I'm trying to learn recovery. If I can just write enough, if I can journal about it, if I can get the right book, if I can learn it, I've got it. And what Jerry knew is that recovery is not learned, it's experienced. You and I did not learn our alcoholism. We experienced it day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, drink by drink. We experienced this descent into the pits of hell. And I'm not going to learn my way out. It's going to take day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, taking a simple set of actions on a daily basis that includes everything that was in that reading in that second edition of strenuous work with other alcoholics, of knowing that I've got really, I don't have anything more important in my life to do than to share what y'all have done with me with someone else. And the odd thing about that is it becomes a spiritual paradox. The busier I am with that, the more time I've had for my granddaughter and my children and my family. It's like there's a God's economy that if I will do these things, more and more and more time opens up to me to live this life that I never believed I could have. But I walked into a Monday night meeting and we're already doing the steps. I'm already into my amends, but James Ford did it again. He got up and said, "My name is James Ford, and I'm a crazy alcoholic. I can't read or write. I can't even sign my own name. My sponsor gave me that big book on tape and let me do that 4-step on a tape recorder. And I hadn't had a drink of whiskey or any other alcohol since April the 20th of 1986. Now, I've heard James say that probably a dozen times, but that night, James became one alcoholic talking to another. And I heard James say, maybe it's not about education. Maybe, Gary, you can read and write in 3 languages, but you can't not drink. Maybe this thing is not learned. Maybe it really is experienced. Maybe you're going to get it from no other group of people than those people that already have it and are trying to share it with you. and we got busy. I could tell you stories about James. I found out as he got older, I carried James all across West Texas. I picked him up for meetings. I got to bring him back to Oklahoma one time. His family lived in Foreman, Arkansas, about 10 miles from where my grandparents were raised. I got to take him back. Now, I mean, this is Arkansas hillbilly corn liquor country. And we pulled up in that yard and he got out and his two old sisters came running to that car, throwing their arms around his neck and hugging and kissing him. And they were so delighted that they had a brother. And they didn't need to know that AA had done that, but James needed to know, and I needed to know. And I got to see that. Well, I'm doing this stuff and life's getting pretty good after about 11 months. I got a transmission in that old truck. I can go places now. I'm probably on about my third girlfriend. It took me a little while to grow up in here. I've got a job. As a matter of fact, I got two of them. I got a little money in my pocket. I've made all those amends. I have children, twins, a son and a daughter. And by then, my daughter was talking to me. My son wasn't. But life's pretty good. And I must be making, God, I bet 25 meetings a week. My whole life is go to work and go to meetings. But things are starting to kind of wear off. I'm real delighted when I'm at the meeting and I'm with you people, but I get home and the wheels are starting to churn a little bit. And there's just not the sense of, AA is fantastic the first 5 or 6 months that you're involved in it. You can almost get a great high just out of the meetings and the fellowship, but that's going to wear off if you're like I am. And Jerry had been telling me, you need to do a little more for others. This isn't a program for you. We don't do recovery for ourselves. We do it for other people. But I'm not getting a hold of all of that. And then a wonderful thing happened. A man asked me to be his sponsor. This guy was about 75 years old, had moved to Odessa in the early 50s to chase the oil field, was living with a daughter that didn't want him there and he didn't want to be there. But he had got another DWI and he had lost his car and his driving privileges. And there he was. And he was coming to these classes. And I guess I met him, and I don't even remember doing that. But I had sponsors said, "You meet everybody you don't know." And I went up and said hello to him again. He asked me to be a sponsor. I started picking him up and taking him to meetings. I'd go over to his daughter's house. We sat down. I got all that information I could get about him. I asked him those two descriptions there on page 44. He had both of them. I started sharing about this stuff and we got into the big book. And I remember it like it was yesterday. We're on page 68 in the inventory, the fear inventory. And while I'm sitting there with him, it came to me suddenly. Remember, I'm highly intelligent. It takes about 6 weeks for things to be sudden with me. Good God Almighty, Gary, you're sitting across the kitchen table from your daddy. There was not a dime's worth of difference between this man's life and my father's life. And I'm wanting this guy to get it so bad I can't hardly stand it. Now, I made my amends to my dad. But you know, sometimes out on the front porch, daddy's still that SOB. I made my amends to him, but I'll still talk about it. There's no difference between this man and my dad, and I'm wanting him to get it, but I'm still denigrating and looking down on my dad. And if you go read that page 68, there's a line in that fear inventory that says we're here to play the role as he assigns it. Now, this guy didn't get it, folks, but I did. I didn't get it when Jerry took me through the steps. I got it when I began to try to share my experience in this book with another man. And it's been that way ever since then. I knew in that moment that that was no longer my dad, I was his son. You know, out on the porch, I made amends to the children's mother, but sometimes she's still that bitch. I love my children. I don't want them to have a bitch for a mother. I want them to have a mother. I'm here to play the role as God assigns it. Same roles after recovery as before: dad, dad, son, son, brother, brother, friend, friend. Only now as He assigns it. Those grandparents weren't the ex-in-laws. They're my children's grandparents. That's their aunts and uncles. I knew in that moment I had to start taking some action to be changed. And that's where I discovered that words are actions. What I call people is what they're going to become. And I had to start taking daily action to rename the people in my life. And that bitch had to be the children's mother. And that was the children's grandparent. And that was my dad, not a sorry SOB. And I'd like to tell you that the birds sang and the violins played, and it was an immediate change, and it wasn't. But little by little and day by day, and then taking a sponsor's suggestion to go to that nursing home where my dad was, to shave him, to do his toenails, to put lotion on him. I didn't want to do any of that stuff. It wasn't my idea. But my sponsor kept reminding me of lines. You know, I used to think he was a brilliant, and I found out everything he was telling me is in the big book. As ex-problem drinkers, our thoughts got to be constantly of others. My thoughts were constantly of me. He said, "You go have some thoughts of your dad and take actions to help him." And almost had to fight him at first to shave him. After about 3 times I'd walk in, he'd lay that head back and I'd put that hot towel on him. He loved that lather. He loved that shaving. And why was I not doing that? I didn't think he had deserved it. He hadn't been a good dad. And it was pointed out to me, you hadn't been a very good kid. Why don't you just concentrate on being a good kid? Be the best dad you can be the best brother you can be the best son you can be. And whatever the children or whatever they do is none of your business. You just do the role that God has assigned for you. When I was 5 years sober, I'm in Midland Memorial Hospital when my dad is dying with a rag on his head, holding his hand. He was no longer a SOB or a still suffering alcoholic. He was just daddy. And I lost a man that day that I loved, who had never changed. And read it again carefully. I read it all the time. It's page 25 in that book of ours. And it's on, there is a solution. And I keep reminding people nothing happens on this page. This is a preview of coming attractions There's some action that has to be taken, but it tells me what I get is I get a new attitude. I've always wanted new circumstances. I've wanted my brother, my daddy, everybody else to change so I would be okay. And this program says we're not going to give you new circumstances. We're going to give you a new attitude. And when you get a new attitude about life, about this world, and about God's universe, guess what? You're going to have new circumstances. And I couldn't believe that till I experienced it. And I told you about that man that helped me find it. People, I went back over there about 2 weeks later, and his daughter met me and said, "He's gone." She didn't know where he went. I've never seen him again. I've never heard from him. I can't even remember his name. But one of the most impactful events that have shaped my life and my recovery happened to a guy who happened to say, "Well, will you be my sponsor?" And I found out later his PO told him he had to get one. That doesn't matter. I needed someone to share this book and my experience with, and it changed me. My time's going to run out before I tell you about the third one, but what I would say is you've got them in your life. All of us have innumerable people. Dr. Bob talks about it in his farewell address. Don't forget, people gave you a pat on the back and a little encouragement, to suit up and to show up and to encourage people and to look around the room. And if there's someone that doesn't have someone that's giving them this program out of our book, why not me? Why not you? I moved at 11 years sober. Chris there knew my sponsor. I moved, and you know what happens when you move? They don't do it right where you move to. And the first thing Steve told me when I wanted to complain, he said, "You go to the next meeting you can go to, and you find you a newcomer and take them out to eat. You need someone to work with." And I've had good health. I've had the ability to do it. But since I was 11 years sober, I've never not had someone I'm taking through the first 9 steps of this program. Not because I'm a good guy, but because they're there and because I need them to remember what's happened to me. Now, I've been telling a little story here, and I got to end up with this, and I just love telling it. One of the things I was a pastor for 14 years. They kicked me out of that for a little bit of light drinking and chasing women. But I thought about one of those stories, and I don't tell it as a church or a biblical story. I tell it as an AA story, but I use it because it tells the story better than I can. And some of y'all know it as the lost sheep. Well, if you pay attention to history and you look at Middle Eastern ancient history, they had herds of goats and flocks of sheep, and most of them were 25 or 30, not large. But every sheep had a bell around its neck. And the shepherd would guide them to green, lush pastures and try to keep them away and keep the wolves away. But the sheep learned to never get away from the sound of the other bells, or they were in danger. And those sheep never did run away. They got their nose down in deep, lush grass and just nibbled themselves away from the flock. Well, AA works real well, and if we're not careful, if you're like I am, the gifts of recovery can sometimes get in the way of the gift of recovery. And I could start to nibble myself away from this flock. The bells for me is all that chatter and laughter and AA symphony before and after a meeting, at a conference or at an event. And whether you've been here for 1 week or for 50 years, I urge you, stay in the sound of the bells, and you're probably going to be okay. Y'all got some great speakers coming up the rest of this month. I want to thank you for allowing me to be a part of your group tonight. Thank you.